Hello, Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers. This is AccuracyWithSelfLongevity.com, and I'm here with Jaiya from SexIsYou.com. And I just want to say first, congratulations, Jaiya, on winning an award tonight at the Feminist Porn Awards, and thanks for inviting us out. It was a very great evening to see you win. I'm glad you won. So,
Me too.
What category was it in?
I won Smutty School Teacher for Best Sex Education this year.
Very cool. So, I've followed your work for a while, and I love everything you put out there, and I know you touch a lot on the traditional aspect of sexuality, but also the deeper side of it being connected with spirituality and even health. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on sort of comparing in the past how the various cultures that were really connected in this way and compared to sort of where we're at today in our society and what you see as causing problems for people in terms of their health, but also how that's related to sexuality and spirituality.
Not an easy question to answer
No.
in a few minutes. I think one of the really fascinating studies for me has been sort of like the anthropological history of sex and how it's evolved. I love Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn.
Yes.
It's a really fantastic, just portrayal of human sexuality over time. And the way that we used to live and the way that we used to be, where things were not so separate and sexuality was not something that was so charged. And I feel like as a result of moving from a place where sexuality, spirituality, health, longevity, all these things you're talking about as well were connected as a culture between lovers, to moving into a culture where it's suddenly the physical is one aspect, the spiritual is something completely different, where our bodies are not honored, or it's something that is not physical, it's something that's sort of airy that we can't touch.
Right.
And also health is not linked in. It's like people don't make the connection between, my heart is having an issue, and so my erectile function might not be where I want it to be. And all of these things being disconnected then is not allowing us to be whole sexually, and also that we have multiple sexualities, and how important it is in honoring all of those different sexual stages throughout life, and being whole in our sexualness. And for me, that means bridging the gap between sexuality, spirituality, and the health aspect. I think that they're all three very, very important, and especially with sex. It's like, if you have great health, you have good sex. In a lot of cases, if you have good sex, it helps your health.
Yes.
People don't realize, like, having good sex, it has a health benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
And also the spiritual connection between two people. So I hope that I answered that question.
That's amazing. Yeah, that really described it very well. One thing that was coming to my mind, sort of when I first really recognized the connection there, specifically even, like, I've been aware of the connection between spirituality and sexuality from whenever I first started looking at things like Tantra and sexual arts from traditions. They always had it connected with spirituality, it seemed. But specifically, I was reading, I believe, The Tao of Sex, Health, and Longevity by Daniel P. Reed. And there was a part in there he was talking about a specific book, I can't remember the name of it, but it was given out to, in China, to newly-wed couples. And it was a book basically on various Taoist Tantra techniques, specifically also helping men not ejaculate quite so frequently every time they have sex, for instance. And what was noticed was that after the Communist Revolution, when they got rid of everything that was related to religion or spirituality, they stopped doing this, and it was actually the basic health of the rural people living on farms and stuff who would have gotten this book, a copy of this pamphlet. Their health declined overall, whereas people in the cities' health went up. But overall the mainstream population of China, the health went down.
And you touched on
In
something
connection-
really important, which
Yeah.
is education. You know,
Yeah.
like people were getting the education, and now we don't have access to a lot of these teachings, which is, you know, the work you're doing, the work that I'm doing is like, how do we educate people about some of these practices that are about health, longevity, connection, spirituality.
Right. So true.
I think another thing we were talking about earlier is practice, personal practice. Yes. And one of the things that has allowed me to have optimal aliveness and health, I often say I don't teach sex, I teach aliveness. And one of the things that has helped me is having a personal practice. And I don't know if you have a practice as well around sexuality, but for me, it's about using breath, intention, movement, sound, sometimes taking away certain senses, like taking away eyesight, because that, so like, when I'm looking through eyes, it's almost like ego stuff, but when I can take that away, it makes me feel things differently. So that my sexuality is always a practice, as opposed to just something I'm doing without intention. There's a frame around it, and that's one of the things that helps me connect it all together.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, personally I have my own practice. It is always evolving and changing, and I find that even I start to sort of just think of my whole practice not breaking up into, okay, this is my sexual practice, this is my meditation practice, this is my exercise, physical workout. I do think of it all as practice. I even try to let go of the word workout for when I'm doing something like strength training. But yeah, in my mind, meditation, if it's just you're sitting there and you're not actually having any intent of it being sexual in that sense, I find that helps my sexual life, but also having some exercise that might be more geared towards that helps my sexual life, but also helps my meditation practice. So it's very interchangeable in that regard.
Together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really,
and when I talk about like sexual meditation, people are sometimes like, it's like the word feminist porn. You know, because we are the feminist porn awards, and it's like it's some weird oxymoron. But for me, it's like when the pleasure comes out of the stillness. Oh my God! Like I just stilled this, and then it makes me more sensitive. And all of a sudden it's this lovely, like, everything's quiet, and then, there's that, and that's the exquisiteness of sex and meditation for me. And then I can go back into, I got really high, I got really to this place like where I'm really close to orgasm, and then I drop back into the meditation.
Okay.
And back into the stillness. And that's a lot of times where my orgasm will happen for me, especially when I'm with a lover. It's like we built to this excitement.
Is that the valley orgasm?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's totally the valley orgasm. It's like the vaginal orgasm for me, the different part of my nervous system where I hit this like, we're at a peak, and then I can drop, he stops, and we have that connection, or we have that breath. And then all of a sudden I have the orgasm in the stillness. In the meditation is where the orgasm will happen instead of with all the excitement. So anyway, we got from culture and practice to orgasms. Somehow it just always leads there to me, for me, when I'm talking about these things.
That's good, that's good. What, just to sort of give a basic idea for anyone who's not familiar with it, what cultures and practices could you reference that, just to give people an idea of certain areas or traditions that had a sexual practice that was, we could say, it's healthy? Because I think we could unanimously say that perhaps Catholicism wasn't that healthy in regards in its approach to sexuality, but you know, something like Tantra from India probably was very much healthy.
Yeah, I grew up Catholic, so a lot of us were recovering Catholics. But yeah, like Tantra, Tantric Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism. There's the White Tigress practice, which I practiced for about a year, and for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's Taoist practice for women. So there's a lot of rejuvenation techniques as well as spiritual enlightenment techniques. A lot of it's through oral sex, actually, which is like, sometimes I'm like, did some guy just make this whole White Tigress thing up? You know, that really, like, he really liked oral sex. But you know, there's a lot of like breast exercises and vaginal tightening exercises. So I love the youth and longevity quality of the White Tigress practice. Right. And I'm fascinated also by the history of it. I mean, to read, like, there's this manual out there that's been out there, and it's just now sort of coming to the surface. And And then
Does that have a specific name?
The White Tiger's Manual.
Okay.
Yeah.
So people can if they're interested.
Yeah, there's a book by Shi Lai. It's
that, yeah.
The Sexual Teachings of the White Tigress, and there's one called for men as well, the Sexual Teachings of the Jade Dragon, which teaches some of the Taoist ejaculation retention type of practices. But yeah, and then in China there's all kinds of really interesting cultures, little tiny cultures that are still in existence that practice like more female-centric sexuality or more open, just that there just hasn't been a rift between sexuality and spirituality and a lot of Eastern, philosophies there. And if you look at a lot of tribal peoples too, there like some of the shamanic cultures, something in like shamanic culture that I find fascinating is the two-spirit, which is a person who doesn't identify as male or female, but they believe are their like spiritual leaders are the people who are two spirits. They walk in both the male and female world, and I find that a really fascinating aspect of in American culture especially. It's like, oh, if you're a two-spirit person or identify as both male and female, or hermaphrodite would be another word, you're a weird sort of outcast.
Certain areas they probably would have burned them or got rid of any children that were born that way.
Or did a surgery to make them one gender or another because we don't understand this. But in the shamanic cultures, it was understood that there were 32 different genders in some cases in some of the shamanic cultures. And so it was understood that these people were very spiritual people and were leaders in their culture. So it's just very interesting.
It is really interesting. I've heard some things about Egyptian sexuality. Do you know anything about that?
I do. There's actually this really fascinating book. I did a piece on Mary Magdalene. I did a lot of research about Mary Magdalene. And there's this really amazing book called the Magdalene Manuscripts. And it talks about sort of like an Egyptian form of Tantra.
Wow.
It's very similar. There's a lot of breathing techniques. They just have different names. It's like a lot of these traditions have the similar techniques, have similar philosophies, but they call everything something different. And so, like for example, in my Tantra tradition, there's something called Cobra Breath, and in this Egyptian tradition, they talk about two cobras rising up the spine, and they do this breathing with it. And one of the theories was that Mary Magdalene came from the Isis cult, and that she actually taught Jesus how to do this breathing technique to circulate his sexual energy to become an immortal. And that was the reason why he resurrected, was through these sexual teachings that Mary Magdalene taught him, which is a crazy far idea, but I actually wrote a play on it and performed this idea of Mary Magdalene being a sexual teacher to Jesus, and
That's really cool.
Someone may stone me someday for
Hopefully not.
I hope not to.
Hopefully things progress beyond that in our world.
Yeah.
That just clicked a light on for me in my mind for a second. I'm just trying to trace back to what I was thinking. Traditionally, like, the thought of Mary Magdalene was that she was a whore.
Right.
And it was seen sort of like she wasn't able, or she wasn't seen as someone that could do that, but if that's true, or that has some possibility in there, that would make more sense, and could be seen as, well, it's almost like the reverse of what most people traditionally think of that feminine archetype.
Yeah. I find it fascinating too that people don't know about the miracles of Mary Magdalene, and when I was doing research, a lot of people don't know that Easter's coming up, and the Easter egg coloring, one of the stories is that when Mary Magdalene, after she saw Jesus in the tomb, she was walking with a basket of eggs, and she saw Pontius Pilate.
Oh, okay.
And Pontius Pilate said, what's going on? And she said, Jesus is risen. And he's like, whatever, no way, right? And she said, he is, and I'll prove it. And she pulled an egg out of the basket, and she changed the color of it to red. And so some of the theories that that's where we get the tradition of coloring Easter eggs, was because that was Mary Magdalene's first miracle after she saw Jesus resurrected. So, there is a whole gospel that she wrote. Where's the bunny? That's something else. She wrote a gospel, and there's just some really incredible stuff that has been lost. It's like it's almost like female pleasure too. We were talking earlier too about the female anatomy and all the pleasure parts being taken out of medical texts at one point during the Victorian era, and it's like, okay, the clitoris was just put back in like 100 years ago, and
being acknowledged,
even being acknowledged at all. Now it's like, okay, well the clitoral roots are being acknowledged now, and that there's a shaft, there's not just a head. Like all these parts were there in the early 1800s, and then they've got like there's drawings of all this anatomy, and the whole erectile network was there, and it all got taken out. What is the piece of suppressing sexuality? What's going on there? Because there's so much power in sexuality.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that. It's power and sexuality, so if you remove it, you're removing power from the one gender that is wanting to be more controlled, but not that control is always a bad thing, but control from a place of fear and wanting to manipulate from a place of greed almost, and fear of what could happen if you're not in control. And we're talking specifically about sort of like the male dominant, what do you call that?
Patriarchy.
Patriarchy, yeah. And I've seen videos portraying that time period where, for instance, I'm trying to think of a specific movie, but does not come to mind, but yeah, you see like a room full of male doctors, and when the first female doctors were coming out, they were ridiculed and had names, they were called names and all those things. So,
and did you know at one time men were not allowed to look at a female body for scientific study? Like, not allowed to look at examine a female cadaver. And so, we've got medicine that's built off of male bodies for the most part, and, anatomy sexually that was not studied. So,
that's a very interesting thing to touch on. So what are some of your other websites if people want to check out?
Sure. Redhottouch.com is my website for sensual massage and touch, and it's tantric massage, but it doesn't have any tantra language in it. Right. And then Oral Sex for Couples is my new series that just won the award.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that has tantric and white tigress and Taoist techniques in it. And then New World Sex Education is my sex education site, and Sex Is You is my site with the stages of sexuality. So
okay, cool.
Lots of websites. I got more, but those are the big ones.
You have probably links to them if they need to know.
Yeah.
And you have a YouTube channel too?
Oh yeah, YouTube. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/newworldsexeducation.com. No, .com at the end.
I'll link it here. We'll go straight to it from the video.
Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on and
thanks for
talking
having
about
me.
this with me.
Hey.
Very much appreciate that. All right. So take care and embrace life without limits.